it's got a short window until the red is gone out of the sky. That's the time for Muslims. The Muslims are supposed to pray very quickly. Now it's interesting that the Quran says in many places that the two ends of the day are the times when people should remember God. Particularly, these two ends, the dawn and the sunset. And I think something that many people notice, and the Muslims take it as, this is one of the aspects that they take from the Quran, of everything being praised, that oftentimes animals gather at those periods. You'll see birds gather at sunset, and they'll gather at the early, before the sunrise, and chirp away. They literally gather and congregate during that time and chirp away. The crickets in the evening start the frogs. That these are all seen as literally praises. That's the way the Muslims view it. Now I'm sure, evolutionary biologists would say the cricket's cooling himself off. But it's interesting. I mean, why things in creation do these things, gather do these things. The Muslims view it as really acts of praise. The next prayer goes from when the red is gone. And this is called Maghrib prayer or the sunset prayer. The next prayer is when the sun, all the red is gone. And this goes basically until midnight, one should do it. And really for the first third of the night, if you divide the night into 3 parts, between 6 a.m. and 6 p.m. It should be done in that first third of the night, after the redness is gone. That's the best time. And then after that, you're delaying it, and the prayers are not encouraged to delay. And it's prohibited to delay them until they actually go out of the time altogether. So that is the next prayer. And then this period is all encouraged for people who want to do extra prayers. The nighttime in particular is encouraged. Many Muslims do night prayer. Many do not. But there are many Muslims that do night prayer some portion of the night. I mean, my teacher, I think minimum was maybe 3 hours.
And then placed around it were capstans, which were manned by dozens of people. And at the given signal,
the man who's here, that's his
practice.
That's
the column would gradually move
and that's his practice. So many Muslims like their practice to prayer at night. It's a good time.
Today, the column remains freestanding on its pedestal at a full height of 155
And also, there's a nice Hasidic tale. Of why the prayer is a special time. In this Hasidic tale, I think Gruber talks about it, that the seeker of God is like a thief trying to steal something precious. And the thief always works at night.
And all the way to Alaska. It consists of 1/6 of the world's land.
The next prayer is dawn prayer, and that begins at the first light. Now, there's an interesting phenomenon called the false dawn, which is a white light that will show up towards the middle of the eastern horizon, and then it disappears, and then after that, the second dawn comes up. The second dawn is the dawn that the Muslims begin their prayer, and that will go until right before sunset. All of that is time that you can pray. The preferred time is at the first time. But any time before that, you can pray. So technically, we can pray anyway from 4:30 till about, is it time to pray? Okay, sunrise, yeah, sunrise, until the sun rises. So we could technically here pray anytime from 4:30 to about probably 4:45 or 5:30 when the sun rises. It would be perfectly acceptable. Unless if you overslept, there's no responsibility. The Prophet Muhammad said, the sleeper has no responsibility, the madman has no responsibility, and the child has no responsibility until they reach puberty. So the sleeper has no responsibility. But there is an idea that if you went to sleep not intending to get up for the prayer, then you are responsible. That you should intend to get up for the prayer. That if you just say, I set your alarm for 8, then that would be considered something wrong, that you've done something wrong. And then the sun comes up.
Require thousands of workers.
Now you will notice a phenomenon because all of the prayers are based on the sun.
In a typical stretch of the railway,
The night prayer when all the red is gone from the sun. The dawn prayer when the first light of the sun comes. And then the next prayer, what you'll notice as the sun is moving up in the sky, and I think this will be a really interesting exercise to give to some of your students if you're interested in doing this, because it will teach them some very interesting things. One of the interesting and fascinating things about human beings is that astronomy is really where we get our mathematics from. Early man became very fascinated with the sky and began to examine and watch the sky and watch the movements of the stars and began to discern certain patterns, right? And over centuries, an accumulation of knowledge occurred, right? I mean, this is what Richard Feynman mentioned, that people who are familiar with him, he was a Nobel Prize winning physicist from Cal Poly and got his Nobel Prize in quantum molecular dynamics.
It was a very hard job to
But
take.
he said that for the physicists and the astronomers, it's true and others, he said really what we're like is people that are watching the gods on Mount Olympus play chess. And they don't let you in on the rules. So what you do is, you have, 40, 50 years of thinking in your lifetime. You start watching the game and you notice, oh, the bishop only moves that way. The pawn moves this way, and the queen moves this way, and you start discerning rules. And he said, and we begin to write those down. Right, so we're discerning that there's patterns here, but we really haven't been given a whole lot of information. And one of the things he says is that the problem with this is that every once in a while something like castling comes up. And you have to start all over again. What was that? So what happened is people became, for some reason, obsessed with the meridian point, determining when the sun reached that meridian point. Now, in the Quran, it says that he gave you the sun and the stars. One of the reasons the sun, according to the Quran, was given to you was to allow you to measure your years and learn mathematics.
World War I.
I mean, that's literally in the Quran. One of the wisdoms behind that is to learn mathematics.
The Russian Tsar was now pushing his people to their
this is like, they'll probably get maybe a little upset when you start bringing geometry into a world history class or something like that, right? But the idea here is that what will happen, how the prayer is determined, is you put a stick here, or you use your body. And if anybody's interested in learning this, I can teach them. All right, because I really, this is fascinating. I've done this with children at Muslim camps. They're fascinated by it. They really enjoy it, and it's a lot of fun. What you'll notice is, towards the western horizon, a shadow shows up that's very long from the early sun. And this shadow will continue to decrease as the sun's moving up until it reaches its shortest point here. And this is the 90-degree angle if you're looking at the 180.
At the same time, that achievement came at important costs. In many respects,
the 90-degree angle
was built on the backs of ordinary Russians.
If you're in an equatorial place on the Earth, which is a very small, narrow place where the sun will actually be directly overhead twice a year, like Mecca, the shadow will disappear completely. The sun is literally directly over your head, and the shadow disappears. For us, you'll notice in the winter the shadow is long, in the summer it's short, based on the movement in the winter towards the south of the sun, shifting the Earth. I mean, I prefer to look at it geocentrically just because that's phenomenologically or experientially. We experience it geocentrically. So I'm gonna speak in geocentric terms, all right? So I'm not trying to, get out of abstract thinking, but I'm just trying to look at this as we experience it as human beings. That instead of looking at it as the shift of the Earth, I'd rather look at it as the sun is moving over, because that's how we see it, and that's how young people experience it. When the sun moves over to the south, then the shadow becomes longer in the winter. Now, as the sun's moving back towards the north,
then the shadow is getting smaller and smaller. So you can actually see the movement of the shadow during the year. It's a very interesting thing, and I've been doing it for a while. So I'm very now accustomed to knowing, I mean, I can pretty much work out what time of the day it is just on my shadow if the sun's out. Because I know the shadow pretty well in the winter and the summer. And if you live with Bedouins who know the sun really well, it's phenomenal how accurate they can tell you the time based on just looking at the shadow. Now there's an interesting verse in the Quran that I find really fascinating, because when I first read this and I first began examining shadows, I started thinking about it, wanted to look in the Quran. There's a verse that said, "Alam tara ila rabbika kayfa madda al-dhil." Haven't you looked at your Lord, how your Lord moves the shadow? Now this gets back to the Tawheedi idea, or idea that the sun is a mean, but in reality it is God that is creating this phenomenon for us.
I will let him live.
And then it says, وَلَوْ شَاءَ رَبُّكَ لَجَعَلَهُ سَاكِنًا. And had your Lord wanted, he would have made the shadow stationary.
From where I send
So
him,
we
there
could
is no return.
imagine a world in which the sun is directly overhead, it'd be pretty hot to live in, but the shadow wouldn't really move.
He has found
right?
forgetfulness with
stationary.
another
But
woman's
we do
arms.
experience a movement of the shadow. And then it says, وَجَعَلْنَا الشَّمْسَ عَلَيْهِ دَلِيلًا. And we made the sun as a prover or an indicator of shadow. So an interesting thing in Arabic, the word for shade and shadow, which are related in English, are from the same, they're the same word, identical word. When I first read that verse, I was really struck, what does that mean we made the sun an indicator of shade or the shadow? So I went through a commentary by Fakhruddin al-Razi, who's a 9th century Persian commentator before. And he just gave this really interesting explanation of that, saying that what the Quran here is doing is it's indicating that one of the greatest lessons of God that most human beings are completely unaware of is shade. Now this is obviously more obvious in a hot country, I admit that. But if you start thinking about it, it actually gets quite profound, because what he said is what shade is a mixture of light and darkness. And the only reason we can see is because of this admixture of light and darkness. If we were in pure light, we could not see, and if we were in pure darkness, we could not see. So shade, in fact, is everywhere, and it's happening all the time. Right now, there's a mixture of light and darkness in this room, which is enabling us to see. And what the Quran is saying, had it not been for the sun, you wouldn't even thought about the shade. It's not something that you would give a whole lot of thought to. So there's an idea of learning about the shade and seeing it as literally a proof of the existence of God. That's how Razi uses it. And the other thing about shade, which is interesting, is that the paradise is described as shade spread out.
Continue your play.
The shade spread out. So what will happen is, in a northerly climate, in the summer, the shadow will reach its shortest point. And what you can do is get the students to put a stick up with a piece of paper, and they can measure it with a ruler. So they can watch the shadow going closer and closer until it reaches the shortest point, and then they'll see it start increasing again. At the point when it reaches the shortest point, that is the meridian point. So they can actually learn to determine for themselves the meridian point, which is a 90-degree angle. Now, at the point which the sun moves one altitudinal degree away from the center of the earth, from the center of the sky, which is here.
The gift from Ramses to His Excellency.
That is the beginning of the Dhuhr prayer. And the sign of it is the shadow begins to increase towards the east.
I will work my hands raw for you.
Now that is the first prayer that was
What camera is that?
And the idea there is,
Please do not shake me.
according to the commentators, is the interesting thing about the beginning of the... See, what's happening is the sun is rising, it reaches the midpoint of the sky, and then it begins its decline. And the idea is that is an indication for the human being.
It could make the difference.
That just as we are like the sun, we rise up, we reach our full strength and power, and then we begin to
like one more.
And sunset is cosmologically seen as death. The idea that death is coming. And so the shade itself is seen as an indication of our own lives. That just as we rise into the east, we will also set in the West. And so the day itself has been traditionally by the Muslims described cosmologically. They say that the mid-morning is like spring, like the child coming into existence. And spring is a fun time. It's
not that far down.
You know, generally where there's, you know, it's a time of renewal, and it's a time of innocence, right? And traditionally, you know, there's a lot of just folkloric things about people falling in love.
Forward, fall back.
Because it's an innocence.
Oh, that's
how
good
we
spot.
associate it folklorically. And then summer
Okay, I don't get
is
that
seen
one, but
as,
that's pretty cool.
When youth, coming into youth, right? And it's a time of work. It's a time of harvest. Youth is when you have a lot of energy to begin to harvest your crops.
Got
It's
a
a
lot
time
of
of
energy
study.
now.
It's a time of dedication. It's a time of exerting a lot of effort. And then the fall is seen as moving now into maturity. And this is the time when you benefit from the fruits of your youth that you harvested. That your mind begins to mature in a way that you now become conscious, and you begin to use the wisdom of your youth in ways. And this is interesting. I think Ericsson's model is interesting that he talks about this period being productivity versus stagnation. Right? That people begin to think beyond themselves as they reach into this mature period of around 40. And it's interestingly that the Muslim worldview does demark the year 40 as this year where perception begins to change, where one begins to get outside of one's egotistical youth and begins to really look beyond one's personal welfare and benefit, and really looks, how can my life be meaningful? And ultimately, meaning in life arises out of service, out of going beyond the self, out of looking at what is my contribution going to be to my society, to my family, to my culture, to my tradition. And this is this period of the fall. And it's a beautiful period because it's a maturing, and it's when there's variation in color, right? You're getting the changing of leaves and all these things. It's a very interesting time fall. And then winter, which is moving into that last period of life, the dryness, the leaves fall, right? The body begins to wear, and we move into that last period of our life, and then death, and then, according to the Muslims, rebirth in the next world, which would be the renewal, and spring is the sign of that. So you can see how in the fair there is this cosmology embedded here. I think we'll take a break now. All right? Is that good? And then what we'll do is we'll come back and I'll open up for some questions about the first section, and then start on the second section. Now this is very early because, I mean, if you look within the Jewish tradition, the Bible, the Old Testament is really, it's gathered over about 900
Each night
years.
brings the black embrace of loneliness.
And you have
The mocking whisper
there's
of the
4
wind, he
dominant
hears the echoing voices
versions
of the dark.
the Deafness, the Elder, the Sacrament, and you'll get some big differences. Within the Christian tradition also, the final codification is already 325 when there's an agreement on the on the 4
wondering if they call the memory of past trials, or wail foreboding of
the
disasters yet
companions
to
of the
come,
prophet himself
or
were the
whether the
ones
desert's
that
hot
gathered
breath
and did this, and they were
has
people
melted
who
his
came out
reason
in marathon
into
from the
madness.
prophet based on his oral tradition. So the
He
Quran
cannot
itself,
cool the
and this is
burning
really
kiss of
important to
thirst
understand,
upon his
the
lips,
written Quran
nor
is
shade
not
the scorching
the
fury of the
primary
sun.
source in which the Quran is protected.
All about
it is protected
is
through oral
desolation.
tradition. This
He
is
can neither bless nor
one,
curse
for people
the
who
power
don't
that
memorize
moves
the
it.
Quran, and 2, as a crutch
does not
for
know
people who
from where
memorize
it
it to go
comes.
back and be reminded if their teacher isn't there or somebody else who isn't a HaQQ. But I
Learning
guarantee
that it
you,
can be
when
more
they
terrible
finish the
to
printing
live
of the
than to
Quran,
die.
they send
He
it
is driven on.
to people who
Through the
memorize the
burning
Quran
crucible of
orally to
desert,
check it. They don't check it
where
against
Holy
other
Land and
Qurans.
church
They send it
are
to
pledged
several
and
Hafaz,
purged
or the
of God's great
people who
love.
memorize the Quran, and they will look at it.
Until
Imam
at last,
al-Qurtubi tells a very interesting
at the
story
end of
in
human
his
strength,
tafsir